This week I talked to a woman who, because of financial circumstances, was stuck in a state-run nursing home. And in my conversation with her, she constantly alluded about her desire to go home. Unfortunately, the conditions of her life doesn't allow anyone in her home to properly care for her, so she's kind of stuck in the nursing home. But I was really taken by her desire to go home, to be surrounded by familiar settings, to be with her husband. She's an elderly woman and the situation was very difficult. This idea of home is a very important one for us. And we remember that T.S. Eliot said that home is where we start from. And typically home is the place where we relax, where we recharge, or as Eliot says, where we start from. But what happens if our home is abusive, if it's not supportive, if it's a dark environment, if it's not really constructive or nurturing or peace-giving to us? And we might even go deeper in that. We might ask ourselves, where is our home in consciousness? Where do we rest in consciousness? Well, it is that place where we feel most comfortable, where we're not stressed, when we're not struggling. That place in consciousness that we call home is where everything seems to be balanced and at peace. Nevertheless, sometimes that place is also not the best possible place that we could be. It might not reflect the highest expression of who we are. Rather, it would reflect the consciousness of where comfort may be for a time. Some of our old thoughts, beliefs, and feelings will creep into that home consciousness and affect us, take us away from our center, away from the idea of who and what we are. And those of us who are working on self-realization, to come into a deeper awareness of who and what we are, will understand that that place that we call home in consciousness is not a stable place, but rather it always seems to be in process. It seems to be moving. Those of us focused on self-realization are constantly pushing the boundaries, trying to understand who and what we are. And of course that affects what we believe to be home consciousness to be. And so today we're going to address the question, who do you think you are? Hello friends, Juan Enrique Toro greeting you on this day, thanking you for those thumbs ups on this video, thank you for your subscriptions, and thank you very much for those donations. They really help us a lot. So there's a Bible story that speaks to the theme for today. This is in Mark 6, 1 through 6. And it says, Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, right, to his home, accompanied by his disciples. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all of this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin and his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there apart from curing a few sick people by laying hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. He was amazed at their lack of faith. So here we have a scene in which Jesus is in his home and he's preaching in the local synagogue where he grew up, and the people that he knows, family and friends and all those who saw him grow up were there, and they're asking themselves, who is this guy? Is he not the carpenter's son, and aren't these his brothers and his sisters? So, basically they're asking the question, who does he think he is, talking and preaching like this? Right? And those thoughts were so strong that it actually affected Jesus. He says that he was amazed at their lack of faith. And of course, in consciousness, whenever we point a finger, You know, in this case, Jesus is pointing a finger at them and saying he was amazed at their lack of faith. I always notice that there are three fingers pointing back, which is basically reminding me that whoever I'm accusing of something, I first need to look at it within myself. And I believe that this is one of the few experiences in the gospel where we have Jesus with an opportunity to really look at his own consciousness, because he seemed, with these comments from these people, to be derailed, to be distracted from the authentic nature of his being. He was distracted from knowing who and what he is. So that is our central question today. Who do you think you are? Now, sometimes you may have heard that question asked of you, and maybe you were trying to do something maybe beyond your reach. Maybe you've questioned that for yourself. Who do you think you are? And of course, the answer to that is a very important question, because it's an eternal question that we ask ourselves: who am I? Who am I? And I think we spend a lifetime trying to really and deeply answer that question for ourselves. And like I say, we understand that when we ask ourselves that question, we might naturally go to the obvious answer. Well, you know, I was born of this mother and father. I had a brother, I had a family. You know, I became a husband, I became a father, I have these careers, I have these likes and I have these dislikes, I like these colors, you know, all of these things that sort of distinguish us in our personality of who we believe we are. And what we understand from a spiritual perspective is that none of it really answers the question, who am I? The answer, who am I, is really a very deep question that is only answered by a deep dive into spaces within ourselves that are beyond the mind, into our spiritual practice, our deep meditation, right? Our prayer work, our spiritual practice, our experience of being in the present moment. That's when we get to experience our true sense of self. And our true sense of self is really a very expansive experience. It's very solid. It feels like a deep knowing. It's sometimes hard to put words to it, but it's a sense that we are so much more than we believe ourselves to be. It's a deep well of peace that we seem to touch. And it seems something so solid, right, that it's really unshakable. Now, you might remember the story in the Bible when Jesus was talking to his disciples. And he asks them this question. He says, who do people say that I am? In other words, he's asking them, who am I? And immediately the disciples start throwing out, well, you know, some say you're John the Baptist, you're Elijah, reincarnation of Elijah, you're a prophet, you're a teacher, all of these things, right? And Peter, one of the disciples, was sitting there, and he seems to have, boom, a moment of realization in which he is able to see clearly beyond all of the physicality of Jesus. And he blurts out and says, from the deepest part of his knowing, he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus, boom, recognizes that and says, Peter, you have spoken rightly. You have seen the truth. He even goes on to say, upon that faith, I will build my church. Right, and this is why Peter is believed to be the very foundation of the church, right? The Christian church. And so, that experience that Peter had, that realization, is a very important one as we address this question about who am I? Who do you think that you are? Because this, what Peter understood about Jesus, is what we need to understand about ourselves. Just as in the previous story, all of those voices that were speaking in the synagogue where Jesus was in his hometown are really thoughts in our mind. that will tell us, who do you think you are? You can't step up beyond your means. You can't do this, always expressing limitation to us. And yet, if we get into a deeper knowing of who we are, that light of awareness can obviously shine forth. And we can come to know, if we're going to put words to that expansive experience that we have in meditation and prayer and spiritual practice and in knowing presence in the present moment, if we have to put words to that, and then we ask ourselves, who am I? We might answer the same way as Peter did. You are the Christ. You are the Son and the daughter of the living God. That, my friends, is who we are. And so every time we touch it, we have this beautiful, expansive experience of who and what we are. But it's not stable. It's not, we touch it once and that's it. We've woken up, we've come into full self-realization. No, we kind of lose that perspective. We come back to an identification of who we think we are, which is this person in this human body who was born and who dies and who has a career and does all these things and likes and dislike, comes and goes, right? But with every sincere prayer, with every sincere meditation, when we really want to come into the present moment, the power of now, as Eckhart Tolle says, with our reading, with our spiritual work, with the therapy that we take, we come into a realization, who do you think you are? I am the Christ. I am the Son and the daughter of the living God. I am much more than what I see in the mirror. There's an invisible reality that I am that is absolutely real and eternal. That knowing resonates in our heart. So let's summarize what we're saying today. In our minds, there is what we could call what is true and what is false, as we perceive who and what we are. There are thoughts that reflect our truth, and there are thoughts that reflect something false. Just to make it easy to understand, okay? What is true is that which is eternal and unchangeable. That is the spiritual nature of our being. It's not born, it does not die, right? It is continuous. It is in perfect oneness with God. It is the absolute realization of ourselves way beyond this physical body. It is true that we are spiritual beings expressing as human beings, absolutely true. But the truth of who we are is not limited to the physical self. That's what's true. What is false? What's false is our identification, our mental identification, where we rattle off all of the accomplishments we've had, all the weaknesses and strengths, that I'm a son, that I'm a brother, that I'm a father, that I'm a husband, etc., etc. All of these limited, I have this career, all of these limited expressions of ourselves. That is the false self, and we say false self. It's a hard word to hear sometimes. But we say false self because it is something that's very limited and very changeable, right? I could be a patient person today and tomorrow I'll be an impatient person. It's not something stable. It's not something eternal. It's not something solid as a rock, right? We can't build upon that. And so we understand that in our mind we have that which is true and that which is false when we answer the question, who am I? Now here's the important part. When we have these experiences of spiritual realization, we come to understand what is true, and we recognize it. There's a movement of recognition. We say, that's who I am. There's a feeling in the body, knowing the oneness with God. That expansive feeling that I was talking about, that sense of centeredness, of solidness. We recognize it. It's important to know that we can recognize it. And why do we recognize it? Because It's in our mind. It may be covered over with all of these false identifications and false beliefs and truths, things that we've piled on upon our consciousness. But when we go beyond those in these spiritual practices that we have, we come to the realization none of that is really true. What is true is that I am the Christ, the Son and the daughter of the living God. That is what's true. And the recognition of that is so important because it seduces us into repeating that experience, knowing that again. And the more we touch it, the more we experience it, the more real it becomes. And so we go beyond the false and we establish the truth because it's already in our mind. Our mind and the mind of God are joined. We say, God and I are one, right? And that's what we mean. The mind of God is my mind. The will of God is my will. God and I are one. The mind of God is my mind, and I'm able to perceive what is true. And now that is a very important realization and an opportunity for us to deepen our practice, to continue to be persistent, to day in and day out practice that, nurture that, give way to that, surrender to that. We do our forgiveness work. We do our spiritual practice. We do those things that help nurture that experience, because that is the realization of who we truly are. And so that which is false will fall away. When we recognize that that which is false will begin to fall away, that's not to say that we can lapse or be detoured, right? Because it happens all the time. But the more we practice, the more real it becomes, and the more that becomes our focus. That's where we live. God and I are one. So what's beautiful in our example for today is that we saw Jesus coming to his hometown, having some people kind of express a lot of doubt about who and what he is. Underneath the surface, what they're saying is, who does he think he is? Or saying to Jesus, who do you think you are? And Jesus was affected by that. These are people that he loves, that he knows. Metaphysically, these are thoughts within our mind that always question us. Who do you think you are? You're no big deal over here. Those are false thoughts that come up from our past. Fearful about letting go of the identification that we believe we've established. But friends, there's nothing to fear. Because the mind of God is our mind. We're able to perceive what is true, and that nurtures us, that feeds us, that brings us home. And so if we ask ourselves the question, who do I think I am? We might connect with the energy of Peter that lives within us. It may be a spark of realization that comes deep within our knowing. And we allow that knowing to come up. We recognize it as true, and we might answer just like he did. You are the Christ. You are the Son and daughter of the living God. Juan Enrique Toro greeting you on this wonderful day, thanking you for the thumbs up, thanking you for subscribing to the channel, and God bless you all for those wonderful donations. Leaving you today with this final thought. Life is consciousness, and consciousness is life.